when a biker punched an elderly black woman, knocking her out because he thought her kind didn't belong in the cafe, he had no idea who her son was. Her son, an off-duty Navy SEAL, watched in horror as his unconscious mother collapsed to the ground. What happened next and how the SEAL reacted was something no one saw coming. Before we start, comment where you're watching from today, and if you enjoy these stories, don't forget to subscribe. Evelyn Carter, a 75-year-old retired schoolteacher, stood just inside the entrance of Beacon Cafe, her hand still clutching her phone as she finished a call with her son, Caleb. "Yes, dear, I've just arrived at the cafe," Evelyn said, her voice filled with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. "I can't wait to see you. It's been far too long." "I'm looking forward to it too, Mum," Caleb's voice crackled through the phone. "I should be there in about 15 minutes. Are you sure you're okay waiting?" Evelyn chuckled softly. "Of course, I'm fine. I may be old, but I'm not helpless. You just focus on getting here safely." "All right, Mom. See you soon. Love you." "Love you too, dear," Evelyn replied, her finger hovering over the red end call button. She pressed it gingerly, her attention divided between the device and her unfamiliar surroundings. As she lowered her phone, Evelyn's eyes widened, taking in the transformed interior of what was once a familiar family cafe. The warm, inviting atmosphere she remembered had been replaced by something harder, more exclusive. Motorcycle club photos adorned the walls, alongside gleaming trophies and various biker memorabilia. The change was jarring, and for a moment, Evelyn felt disoriented. Lost in her observations, Evelyn took a step forward, not noticing the large man in a leather jacket approaching from her left. Their shoulders collided, causing Evelyn to stumble slightly. "Watch where you're going, Grandma," the biker sneered, his voice laced with contempt. "You lost or something? This ain't your kind of place." Evelyn straightened herself, smoothing down her cardigan with trembling hands. She looked up at the man, his face twisted in a mocking grin. Despite the ache in her heart at his words, she managed to keep her composure. "I'm terribly sorry," she said, her voice steady despite her inner turmoil. "These old eyes of mine aren't what they used to be. Please excuse me." The biker scoffed, muttering something under his breath as Evelyn carefully made her way past him. She could feel his eyes boring into her back, along with the stares of other patrons who had witnessed the exchange. The weight of their gazes made her shoulders tense, but she pressed on, determined not to let their hostility deter her. As she moved through the space, Evelyn couldn't help but marvel at how dramatically different it looked from her memories. The once familiar family cafe had truly transformed into a biker hangout. She watched as the man she had bumped into earlier walked to his seat, joining a group of other leather-clad individuals. They laughed raucously, the sound grating against Evelyn's nerves. Evelyn continued walking, searching the room for an empty seat. She made her way to a booth by the window, feeling the weight of stares from both staff and patrons. The waitresses, dressed in short, tight skirts, eyed her suspiciously. It was clear that this was no longer the welcoming establishment where she had once graded papers after school with her fellow teachers, or shared family meals with her late husband and children. As she settled into the booth, Evelyn's thoughts drifted to those happier times. She could almost see the ghosts of her past, her husband's kind smile as he sipped his coffee, her children's laughter as they played in the corner. Now her husband was gone, and her children were scattered across different states. The contrast between those warm memories and the cold reality of the present made her heart ache. Despite the unwelcoming atmosphere, Evelyn tried to keep a positive outlook. She was here to meet Caleb, her son, whom she hadn't seen in years. The thought of reuniting with him brought a small smile to her face. She had endured harsh treatment and countless racist comments throughout her life, and while it still hurt, she refused to let it dampen her spirits today. Evelyn took a deep breath, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as she waited. The cafe may have changed, but she was determined to make the most of this precious time with her son. As she sat there, surrounded by the unfamiliar and unwelcoming, Evelyn held on to the hope that Caleb's arrival would bring a piece of warmth back to this place that had once meant so much to their family. Evelyn had been sitting in the booth for several minutes, her eyes occasionally darting to the door in anticipation of Caleb's arrival. The hostile atmosphere of the transformed Beacon Cafe weighed heavily on her, but she was determined to stay positive. Her reverie was interrupted by the sharp click of heels approaching her table. A waitress, her bleached blonde hair piled high on her head and her uniform leaving little to the imagination, stopped at Evelyn's booth. Instead of the welcoming smile Evelyn remembered from the old days, the young woman's face was twisted into a look of barely concealed annoyance. "Are you lost or something?" the waitress asked, her tone dripping with condescension. "This isn't exactly a place for, well, you know." Evelyn straightened in her seat, maintaining her dignity despite the waitress's rudeness. "No, dear, I'm not lost. I'm waiting for my son. We're meeting here." The waitress raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "Right. Well, what can I get you while you're waiting?" "I'd like to see a menu, please," Evelyn requested politely. The waitress let out an exaggerated sigh. "We don't do paper menus anymore. It's all QR codes now, or you can read the board behind the counter." Evelyn's brow furrowed in confusion. "I'm sorry, but I don't know how to scan QR codes, and I'm afraid my eyesight isn't what it used to be. I can't read the board from here." The waitress's irritation grew visibly. She clicked her tongue, the sound sharp and grating. "Look, lady, I don't have time for this. Just walk up to the counter if you want to see the menu." Evelyn's cheeks flushed with embarrassment, but she remained calm. "I understand you're busy, but even if I go to the counter, I'm afraid I won't be able to read the board. It's hung quite high, and my eyes, well, they're not as good as they once were." Frustration etched across the waitress's face. "Fine," she snapped, snatching Evelyn's phone from the table. "Give me that. I'll scan it for you." The waitress's actions were rough and impatient as she manipulated Evelyn's phone, making no attempt to explain the process. Evelyn watched, feeling a mix of gratitude for the assistance and sadness at the lack of kindness in the gesture. The technology that was supposed to make ordering easier had become yet another barrier, emphasizing Evelyn's feelings of displacement in this modern version of her once familiar cafe. After a moment, the waitress thrust the phone back at Evelyn. "There, the menu's on your screen now." Evelyn took the phone carefully, squinting at the small text on the screen. She fumbled with the zoom function, trying to make the letters large enough to read. The waitress tapped her foot impatiently, making no effort to hide her annoyance at the delay. After a few moments of careful perusal, Evelyn looked up with a hopeful smile. "Do you still serve those delicious orange marmalade muffins? They were my husband's favorite when we used to come here." The waitress's face contorted in confusion and irritation. "Lady, we've never served anything like that. You must be thinking of somewhere else." "Oh, but you did," Evelyn insisted gently. "It was years ago, of course, but they were quite popular." "Well, we don't have them now," the waitress snapped. "We've got a limited dessert menu these days. Bikers aren't big on fancy muffins." Evelyn's shoulders sagged slightly. Another piece of her cherished memories chipped away. "I see. Well, in that case, I'll just have a simple coffee, please." The waitress rolled her eyes. "Fine, one coffee. Anything else?" Evelyn shook her head and the waitress turned to leave. As she walked away, she tossed a parting shot over her shoulder. "Next time, have your eyes checked, Grandma. Might make things easier for everyone." As the waitress's words hung in the air, Evelyn sat back in her booth, feeling every one of her 75 years. She thought to herself how difficult it seemed for young people these days to show even a modicum of respect for their elders. The cafe that had once been a haven of warmth and family memories now felt cold and unwelcoming. Evelyn's hands trembled slightly as she placed her phone back on the table. She took a deep breath, reminding herself that Caleb would be arriving soon. The thought of seeing her son after so long brought a small smile back to her face. She would endure this unpleasantness, she decided. After all, she had faced far worse in her lifetime. As she waited for her coffee, Evelyn's mind drifted back to happier times in this very cafe. She could almost hear the laughter of her children, the warm conversations with her fellow teachers, the gentle teasing of her late husband. Those memories were a stark contrast to the harsh reality of the present, but they gave her strength. Evelyn straightened her back, determined to face whatever else this changed world might throw at her with the same grace and dignity she had always maintained. As Evelyn's thoughts drifted between memories and the current reality, the cafe's door swung open with a creak. A tall, broad-shouldered man in a crisp white navy uniform stepped inside, his presence immediately commanding attention. It was Caleb, her son, his military bearing evident in his posture and movements. Caleb paused just inside the entrance, his eyes scanning the transformed interior. The contrast between his dignified appearance and the rough biker atmosphere was stark. For a moment, confusion flickered across his face as he tried to reconcile his childhood memories with the scene before him. Before Caleb could fully orient himself, two large men approached him. Evelyn recognized one as Jake, the biker she had bumped into earlier. His companion, a burly man with a shaved head, wore a jacket with the name Troy emblazoned on it. Jake's voice carried across the cafe, dripping with mock concern. "Oh, look at this, Troy. He's as blind as that woman earlier. Must be her son. Or are all their kind illiterate and can't read signs that this is a biker's cafe?" Troy snickered, his eyes raking over Caleb's uniform. "What's with the cosplay, soldier boy? You playing dress-up or something?" Caleb drew a deep breath, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. Years of military training had instilled in him a deep sense of self-control, and he called upon it now. He was a respected Navy SEAL, trained to handle far more dangerous situations than this. He wouldn't waste his energy on disrespectful individuals like these. "Gentlemen," Caleb said, his voice calm and measured, "I assure you I can read just fine. I'm simply confused because this place has changed significantly since I was last here. Is this still Beacon Cafe?" Jake's eyes narrowed, clearly irritated by Caleb's composed response. "Yeah, it's Beacon Cafe, but it ain't for your kind anymore, pretty boy." "I see," Caleb replied, his tone neutral. "Well, as paying customers, I believe my mother and I have as much right to be here as anyone else." Troy stepped closer, his massive frame looming over Caleb. "Yeah, we'll see how much you enjoy this place. We'll make it a stage for you, boy. Free entertainment." As Caleb and Troy locked eyes, Jake leaned in, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "This isn't over, soldier boy. Not by a long shot." The two bikers retreated, but the threat hung heavy in the air. Caleb remained rooted to the spot, his training warring with his instincts. He knew he could handle these men if it came to it, but he was also acutely aware of the potential consequences of a physical altercation, especially while in uniform. Just as the tension seemed to reach its peak, a familiar voice cut through the hostile atmosphere. "Caleb! Caleb!" Evelyn's voice, filled with joy and relief, drew Caleb's attention away from the retreating bikers. He turned to see his mother waving from a booth by the window, her face lit up with a warm smile that seemed out of place in the harsh environment of the transformed cafe. As Caleb made his way to the booth, he could feel the eyes of the other patrons following him. The weight of their stares was heavy, but it was nothing compared to the warmth that filled his heart at the sight of his mother. It had been 8 long years since they'd last seen each other in person, and despite the unpleasant welcome, Caleb was determined to make this reunion count. "Mum," he said softly as he reached the booth, leaning down to embrace Evelyn. The familiar scent of her perfume brought back a flood of childhood memories, momentarily pushing away the tension of the past few minutes. Evelyn held her son tight, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Oh, Caleb, it's so good to see you, my boy." As they separated, Caleb slid into the booth across from his mother, his eyes taking in every detail of her face. She looked older than he remembered, with new lines etched around her eyes and mouth. But her smile was just as warm as ever, a beacon of love in this unwelcoming place. "I saw they gave you a difficult time," Evelyn said, her voice tinged with concern. Caleb nodded, his expression serious. "Nothing I can't handle, Mum. Did those men trouble you too?" Evelyn sighed, her shoulders sagging slightly. "As you might have guessed, but I've heard countless racist comments throughout my life. It's sad that it's still happening these days, as if people never learn anything." Caleb reached across the table, taking his mother's hand in his. "I'm sorry you had to go through that again, Mum." Evelyn squeezed his hand, a determined look crossing her face. "No, we shouldn't waste our time worrying about those people. Let's enjoy our time together. It's been far too long, and I want to hear all about your life in the Navy." As mother and son settled into conversation, the hostile stares from the other patrons seemed to fade into the background. For Caleb and Evelyn, this moment of reunion was a precious gift, one they were determined to cherish despite the unwelcoming atmosphere surrounding them. The din of the biker-filled cafe seemed to fade into the background as Caleb and Evelyn focused on each other, their reunion a warm bubble of familiarity in the midst of the transformed Beacon Cafe. Evelyn's eyes sparkled with pride as she took in her son's crisp navy uniform, a symbol of his dedication and achievements. "Look at you," Evelyn said, her voice filled with motherly admiration. "Every inch the naval officer. Your father would have been so proud to see you like this." Caleb's expression softened at the mention of his late father. "I think about him every day, especially when I'm on duty. I hope I'm living up to his expectations." "Oh, my dear boy," Evelyn reached across the table to pat his hand. "You've exceeded them, I'm sure of it." Their moment was interrupted by the approach of the waitress, her demeanor no warmer than before. Caleb, noticing her attitude, straightened in his seat, his military bearing evident. "Could I get a beer, please?" Caleb asked politely. "I'm off duty," he added almost as an afterthought. The waitress nodded curtly, then turned to leave without acknowledging Evelyn. "Excuse me," Evelyn called after her, her voice firm but polite. "I ordered a coffee quite some time ago, but it hasn't arrived yet." The waitress turned back, her expression a mixture of annoyance and indifference. "I'll bring both drinks together," she said flatly before walking away. Caleb's brow furrowed as he watched the waitress retreat. "Has the service always been like this?" he asked, turning back to his mother. Evelyn sighed, shaking her head. "No, not at all. This place, and it's changed so much, Caleb. Do you remember how it used to be?" Caleb's eyes scanned the room, taking in the biker memorabilia and the rough crowd. "I can hardly believe it's the same place. Remember the bowling alley in the back? Sarah, Mark and I used to beg Dad to let us play after dinner." A wistful smile crossed Evelyn's face. "Oh yes, and your father would always give in, even though we both knew you'd be too wound up for bedtime afterward." "And you'd sit right here," Caleb continued, tapping the table, "grading papers while we played." Evelyn nodded, her eyes misting over with memories. Those were such happy times. As they reminisced, both Caleb and Evelyn became acutely aware of the increasing number of hostile stares from the other patrons. The bikers from earlier, Jake and Troy, were watching them intently from across the room, their expressions dark and threatening. Evelyn shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "Perhaps we should go somewhere else, Caleb. I'm not sure we're very welcome here anymore." Caleb's jaw set in determination. "No, Mum, we have every right to be here. We're paying customers, and this place holds special memories for us. We shouldn't let them drive us away." Evelyn studied her son's face, seeing the strength and resolve there. It reminded her of his father, and a surge of pride welled up inside her. "You're right, of course. It's hard to see a place that meant so much to us changed like this." "I know, Mom," Caleb said softly, "but we're here now together. Let's make the most of it." Just then, the waitress returned with their drinks, placing them on the table without a word before hurrying away. Caleb raised his beer in a small toast. "To family," he said, his voice warm, "and to memories, both old and new." Evelyn lifted her coffee cup, clinking it gently against Caleb's beer bottle. "To family," she echoed, her smile reaching her eyes for the first time since entering the cafe. As they sipped their drinks, mother and son fell into easy conversation, catching up on the years they'd spent apart. Despite the unwelcoming atmosphere around them, they found comfort in each other's presence, their bond strong enough to withstand the hostility surrounding them. "Mom, I've got some news," he said, straightening in his seat. Caleb's expression grew more serious. "I've recently been promoted in the Navy. I'm now a lieutenant commander." Evelyn's eyes widened with pride and excitement. "Oh, Caleb, that's wonderful news." She beamed at him, her joy palpable. But as she leaned forward, the cafe's harsh lighting caught her eyes at just the right angle, and Caleb noticed something he hadn't seen before. "Mum," he said, his voice tinged with concern, "your eyes, is that a cataract I'm seeing?" Evelyn's smile faltered slightly as she instinctively blinked and looked away. "Oh, you noticed that, did you?" "Yes, I'm afraid so. It's been developing in my left eye for a while now." Caleb frowned, leaning closer across the table. "Why didn't you tell me? How bad is it?" Evelyn sighed, her hands wrapping around her coffee cup as if seeking comfort. "It's manageable for now, but I won't lie. It's making daily life increasingly challenging. Living alone, well, it's not as easy as it used to be." "Mom," Caleb said firmly, reaching out to take her hand, "you don't have to struggle alone. I can help cover the medical treatment. We'll get this taken care of." Evelyn squeezed his hand gratefully, but there was a hesitance in her eyes. "That's very kind of you, dear. But it's not just about the money. The doctors, they're not sure if surgery is the best option given my age." Caleb's brow furrowed deeper. "What do you mean? Surely they can do something." "They can," Evelyn nodded, "but there are risks involved. And recovery at my age, well, it's not as straightforward as it would be for someone younger." A heavy silence fell between them, broken only by the continued background noise of the cafe. Caleb studied his mother's face, noticing for the first time the additional lines of worry that hadn't been visible in their video calls. "You know," Evelyn said softly, her voice taking on a wistful tone, "I sometimes wish your brothers would take more interest in my care. I understand you have your military duties, Caleb, and it's natural that you live far away, but the others, they barely call once a year." The pain in Evelyn's voice was unmistakable, and Caleb felt a pang of guilt. He had been so focused on his career, on serving his country, that he hadn't fully considered the toll his absence, and that of his brothers, was taking on their mother. "Mom," he said, his voice filled with determination, "I promise you, we're going to figure this out. I'll talk to Mark and David. We'll make sure you're taken care of, whether it's for the cataract or anything else you need." Evelyn smiled at her son, touched by his concern. "You're a good boy, Caleb, just like your father. But don't worry too much about me. I've managed this long, haven't I?" Caleb shook his head, unwilling to let the matter drop. "You shouldn't have to just manage, Mom. You deserve better than that. We'll make it happen, I promise." As the conversation between Caleb and Evelyn turned to more somber topics, a heaviness settled over their booth. The weight of unspoken family dynamics and the challenges of aging alone hung in the air between them. Evelyn, feeling the need to collect herself, gently placed her hand on Caleb's arm. "Excuse me for a moment, dear," she said softly. "I need to freshen up a bit." Caleb nodded, concern evident in his eyes as he watched his mother carefully navigate her way through the crowded cafe towards the restrooms. Evelyn moved slowly, her steps measured and deliberate, a stark contrast to the boisterous energy of the bikers around her. Once inside the bathroom, Evelyn leaned against the sink, her hands gripping the porcelain edge as she stared at her reflection in the spotted mirror. The harsh fluorescent lighting accentuated every line on her face, every strand of silver in her hair. She saw a woman who had lived a full life, but also one who was grappling with the realities of aging. As she splashed cool water on her face, Evelyn's thoughts drifted to her children. Caleb was here, yes, but what about Mark and David? Would she ever see all three of her boys gathered together again before her eyesight failed completely? Or worse, before... Evelyn shook her head, banishing the morbid thought. No, she wouldn't let herself think that way. She was here now with Caleb. That was something to be grateful for, something to cherish. "Come now, Evelyn," she whispered to her reflection. "No use being melancholy. Enjoy this moment with your son." With a deep breath and a final adjustment of her cardigan, Evelyn turned to leave the restroom. As she opened the door, however, she found herself face to face with a wall of leather and denim. Jake, Troy, and several other bikers had positioned themselves directly outside the restroom, effectively blocking her path. "Well, well," Jake sneered, his voice dripping with mock politeness. "Look who we have here, the old lady who thinks she can disrespect us in our own place." Evelyn's heart raced, but she kept her composure, years of dealing with unruly students coming to her aid. "Excuse me, gentlemen. I'd like to return to my son." Troy stepped forward, towering over Evelyn. "Your son? You mean that loser in the costume? What's he trying to prove, anyway?" The other bikers chuckled, their laughter harsh and mocking. Evelyn felt a surge of anger rising within her. She had spent a lifetime dealing with discrimination and rudeness, but hearing these men insult her son, her brave, dedicated Caleb, was more than she could bear. "You should all be ashamed of yourselves," Evelyn said, her voice steady and clear. "My son's a better man than you'll ever be. He serves this country while you sit here, bullying old women and feeling important." Her words, though dignified, proved to be the spark that ignited their anger. Jake's face contorted with rage as Evelyn pushed past them, trying to make her way back to the booth where Caleb waited. Before she could retake her seat, Jake's large hand grabbed her arm tightly. "What did you say, you old hag?" he growled. "How dare your kind disrespect me?" The grip on her arm was painful, and in a moment of self-defense and accumulated frustration, Evelyn did something she hadn't done in decades. She slapped him. The sound of the slap seemed to echo through the suddenly silent cafe. For a moment everyone froze, shocked by the elderly woman's act of defiance. Then, with a roar of anger, Jake retaliated. His fist connected with Evelyn's face with brutal force, sending the elderly woman crashing to the ground. Blood immediately began streaming from her nose, and pain exploded across her face. As Evelyn lay on the cold tile floor, dazed and in pain, she could hear the bikers laughing above her. Their voices seemed distant, muffled by the ringing in her ears. In that moment, all she could think about was Caleb, hoping against hope that he wouldn't do anything rash when he saw what had happened. Time seemed to stand still. The sound of his mother's voice, raised in distress, cut through the din of the cafe like a knife. Caleb's head snapped up, and what he saw made his blood run cold. Without conscious thought, Caleb launched himself from the booth. He crossed the table in a blur of motion, his focus narrowed to a singular purpose: protect his mother. As he neared the group, he could hear their taunts and laughter, fueling his anger even further. "Mum!" Caleb called out, his voice cutting through the bikers' jeers. The group turned, surprise registering on their faces as they saw the Navy officer bearing down on them. In a fluid motion born of years of training, Caleb tackled Jake and Troy, taking both larger men to the ground. His mind raced, evaluating the situation even as his body reacted. He had Jake pinned beneath him, his fist raised and ready to strike. But then something stopped him. A voice in his head, ingrained through years of military discipline, reminded him of the consequences of his actions. He was in uniform, representing not just himself, but the entire United States Navy. Any violence on his part, no matter how justified it might feel, could have severe repercussions. That moment of hesitation was all the other bikers needed. Rough hands grabbed Caleb, yanking him off Jake and Troy. He found himself surrounded, outnumbered, with angry faces pressing in from all sides. "You're dead, pretty boy," one of the bikers snarled, his face inches from Caleb's. "Nobody touches our leader and walks away." Caleb stood his ground, his military bearing evident even as he was surrounded by hostile faces. "Your leader just assaulted an elderly woman," he said, his voice low and controlled. "My mother. If anyone should be worried, it's him." Jake, now back on his feet, pushed through his protective circle to confront Caleb. "You've got some nerve, boy. Do you know who we are? What we can do to you and your precious mommy?" Before Caleb could respond, a weak voice cut through the tension. "Caleb. Caleb, dear." Immediately, Caleb's focus shifted. He pushed past the bikers, ignoring their threats, and knelt beside his mother. Despite her bloodied nose and the bruise already forming on her cheek, Evelyn maintained her dignity. "I'm okay, son," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Help me up, please. I need to clean myself up." With gentle hands, Caleb helped Evelyn to her feet. He guided her back to their booth, his arm protectively around her shoulders. "Mum, we need to get you to a hospital," he said, his voice thick with concern. But Evelyn shook her head. No, I'll be fine. Just let me go to the restroom to clean up." As Evelyn made her way back to the bathroom, Caleb turned to survey the scene. He noticed that other white customers were now watching, their faces a mix of shock and poorly concealed interest. The waitress who had been so rude earlier was on the phone, presumably calling the police. Jake and Troy had returned to their seats, but their eyes bored into Caleb, promising that this confrontation was far from over. Before Evelyn could return from the restroom, the cafe door burst open, and 2 police officers rushed in, their hands on their holstered weapons. Caleb felt a moment of relief, thinking that justice would now be served. But that relief was short-lived. As the officers approached, Caleb could see the bikers exchanging knowing looks. His stomach sank as he realized what was about to happen. "What's going on here?" one of the officers demanded, his hand resting on his holster as he eyed Caleb suspiciously. Before Caleb could explain, Jake stepped forward. "Officer, thank God you're here. This drunk black soldier attacked me and my friend unprovoked. We were just minding our own business when he went crazy." Caleb's protest died on his lips as he saw the officers' expressions harden. They looked at him, taking in his disheveled uniform and the chaos around him, and seemed to come to an immediate conclusion. "Sir, I'm going to need you to put your hands behind your back," one of the officers said, approaching Caleb with handcuffs at the ready. "Wait, no, you don't understand," Caleb began, but his words were cut off as the officer roughly spun him around and cuffed his wrists. "You have the right to remain silent," the officer began reciting, but Caleb barely heard the words. His eyes were locked on his mother, who was watching the scene unfold with horror. "Caleb!" Evelyn cried out, trying to push past the waitress to reach her son. "Officers, please, you're making a mistake. My son didn't do anything wrong." But her pleas fell on deaf ears. The bikers had closed ranks, presenting a united front to the police. The few other patrons in the cafe remained silent, unwilling or afraid to speak up against the dominant biker presence. As Caleb was led towards the exit, he caught a final glimpse of his mother's tear-stained face. The afternoon that was supposed to be a joyful reunion had turned into a nightmare, and Caleb found himself powerless to stop it. Outside, as the officers prepared to place Caleb in the patrol car, the situation seemed hopeless. The false narrative spun by the bikers had taken hold, and Caleb's protests fell on deaf ears. The officers, swayed by the united front presented by Jake, Troy, and their gang, were proceeding with the arrest, despite the obvious inconsistencies in the story. One of the officers, a younger man with a stern expression, approached Caleb with a breathalyzer. "Sir, we're going to need you to take a breath test," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Caleb, his wrists still bound behind his back, nodded solemnly. He knew he had only had one beer, but in this moment, even that single drink felt like a damning piece of evidence against him. As he blew into the device, he could see the smug grins on the faces of Jake and Troy, who were watching the proceedings from the cafe entrance. The breathalyzer beeped, and the officer checked the reading. His eyebrows raised slightly, but he didn't comment. Instead, he turned to his partner and nodded, a silent confirmation that sealed Caleb's fate. "All right, into the car," the older officer said, placing his hand on Caleb's shoulder to guide him towards the patrol vehicle. Just as Caleb was about to be placed in the back seat, a commotion from the cafe door caught everyone's attention. Evelyn had managed to push past the waitress and was now hurrying towards the scene, her face a mixture of distress and determination. "Please, officers," she called out, her voice trembling but clear. "You're making a terrible mistake. My son is innocent. He was only trying to protect me." The younger officer turned to Evelyn, his expression softening slightly at the sight of the elderly woman's obvious distress. "Ma'am, I understand you're upset, but we have multiple witnesses stating that your son instigated the altercation." "That's not true," Evelyn protested, her voice rising with frustration. "Those men, they were harassing us. They struck me. Look at my face." The officers exchanged glances, noting the bruising beginning to form around Evelyn's eye and the dried blood beneath her nose. However, before they could respond, Jake's voice cut through the tension. "Officers, the old lady is confused," he said, his tone dripping with false concern. "She had a bit too much to drink and took a tumble in the bathroom. We were trying to help her when her son went berserk." Evelyn's face flushed with anger. "That is a lie! I haven't had a drop of alcohol. Her words were cut off by the sudden arrival of another police vehicle. As it pulled up beside the first patrol car, a tall, distinguished-looking officer stepped out. His uniform indicated a higher rank, and there was an air of authority about him that immediately commanded attention. "What's the situation here?" the new arrival asked, his eyes scanning the scene before him. The younger officer began to explain, but his words trailed off as the senior officer's gaze fell on Caleb. Recognition flashed in his eyes, followed quickly by confusion. "Caleb?" he said, stepping closer. "Caleb Carter, is that you?" Caleb's head snapped up, his eyes widening as he recognized the man before him. "Senior Officer Barrington. Daniel, is that you?" Daniel Barrington, for it was indeed him, looked between Caleb and the other officers, his brow furrowed in concern. "Can someone explain to me why one of the Navy's most decorated SEALs is in handcuffs?" A hush fell over the scene. The other officers looked at each other uncertainly, while Jake and Troy shifted uncomfortably in the background. Evelyn, sensing a shift in the dynamic, stepped forward. "Officer Barrington, was it?" she said, her voice steadier now. "Please, my son is innocent. These men," she gestured towards the bikers, "they've been harassing us all afternoon. They struck me when I stood up to them, and Caleb was only trying to protect me." Daniel's expression hardened as he took in Evelyn's injuries. He turned to the other officers. "Remove those handcuffs immediately," he ordered. As one of the officers moved to comply, Daniel addressed Caleb directly. "I'm sorry about this, Lieutenant Commander. I assure you we'll get to the bottom of this." Jake, sensing the situation slipping out of his control, stepped forward. "Now wait just a minute," he began, but Daniel cut him off with a sharp look. "Sir, I suggest you step back and remain silent," Daniel said, his voice carrying the full weight of his authority. "We're going to sort this out, and I have a feeling you're not going to like where it leads." As the handcuffs fell away from Caleb's wrists, a palpable shift in the atmosphere occurred. The smug grins of the bikers had vanished, replaced by looks of uncertainty and fear. Evelyn moved to her son's side, relief evident on her face, as she took his hand in hers. Daniel turned to his fellow officers. "Let's take this back inside," he said, gesturing towards the cafe. "I want to hear everyone's story, and I mean everyone. No one leaves until we get to the truth." As the group began to move back towards Beacon Cafe, Caleb caught his mother's eye. In that moment, a silent understanding passed between them. The tide had turned, and justice, it seemed, might finally be served. The interior of Beacon Cafe, once filled with the raucous laughter and intimidating presence of the biker gang, now held a tense silence as Senior Officer Daniel Barrington took charge of the situation. The patrons, staff, and bikers alike watched with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension as Daniel led Caleb, Evelyn, and the other officers back inside. Daniel's commanding presence seemed to fill the room as he addressed the gathered crowd. "All right, everyone. I want to know exactly what happened here, and I want the truth. Who wants to start?" For a moment, no one spoke. The bikers exchanged nervous glances, while the cafe owner and waitress fidgeted uncomfortably behind the counter. Evelyn, still holding Caleb's hand, stepped forward. "I'll start, Officer Barrington," she said, her voice steady despite the bruising on her face. "My son and I came here for a reunion. We used to visit this cafe years ago, but it's changed so much. From the moment we arrived, we were treated with hostility and disrespect." As Evelyn recounted the events of the afternoon, from the initial confrontation to the attack in the hallway, Daniel listened intently, his expression growing increasingly grave. When she finished, he turned to Caleb. "Lieutenant Commander, do you have anything to add?" Caleb nodded, his military bearing evident as he spoke. "Sir, everything my mother said is true. I reacted when I saw her injured, but I did not initiate any violence. I was attempting to defuse the situation when the police arrived." Now Daniel turned his attention to the cafe owner and waitress. "And you two, what did you see?" The owner, a middle-aged man with a receding hairline, shifted uncomfortably. "Look, officer, we don't want any trouble. These bikers, they're our regulars. We can't afford to lose their business." "So you were willing to let an innocent woman be assaulted in your establishment?" Daniel's voice was sharp, causing the owner to flinch. The waitress, her earlier bravado gone, spoke up hesitantly. "It's true," she admitted. We saw everything. The bikers were harassing them from the moment they walked in. We were too scared to do anything. A murmur ran through the crowd. Jake, his face red with anger, stepped forward. "You can't believe them. We're the victims here. That soldier attacked us." Daniel held up a hand, silencing Jake's protests. "I've known Lieutenant Commander Carter for years. We served together on Operation Silent Abyss, a top-secret mission in the Gulf of Aden. We intercepted and neutralized a pirate group that had hijacked a commercial vessel carrying humanitarian aid. Caleb's actions saved countless lives. He's one of the most honorable men I know." The revelation seemed to hang in the air, its weight palpable. Several of the bikers shifted uncomfortably, while a few of the regular patrons exchanged guilty looks. Suddenly, a voice spoke up from the back of the cafe. "It's true," said an older man, rising from his seat. "I saw everything. Those bikers have been terrorizing this place for months. What they did to that poor woman. It ain't right. I should have spoken up sooner." His words seemed to break a dam. Suddenly, other patrons were speaking up, confirming Evelyn and Caleb's version of events. The cafe owner, seeing the tide turn, approached Daniel. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice heavy with shame. "We should have done something. It's just, we were afraid. These guys, they've been running this place like it's their own private club. We didn't know how to stop it." Daniel nodded, his expression stern but not unkind. "I understand fear, but it's no excuse for allowing innocent people to be harmed. This stops now." He turned to the other officers. "I want statements from everyone here, and you," he pointed at Jake and Troy. "You're coming with us. Assault, intimidation, false statements to police. You're looking at some serious charges." As the officers moved to apprehend Jake and Troy, several other bikers made a dash for the exit. Daniel's voice rang out. "Anyone who leaves now will be considered an accomplice. I suggest you stay and give your statement." The cafe owner approached Caleb and Evelyn, his face a mask of remorse. "I'm so sorry for what happened to you both. Please, let me get you some ice for your face, ma'am. Your meals are on the house, of course." Evelyn nodded graciously, while Caleb kept a protective arm around his mother's shoulders. As the chaos of arrests and statements swirled around them, they found a quiet moment to breathe. "Are you okay, Mom?" Caleb asked softly, his eyes filled with concern as he gently touched the bruising on her face. Evelyn managed a small smile. "I'm all right, dear. It's not the first time I've faced prejudice, though I hope it might be the last. I'm just glad you're safe." As the situation in the cafe began to settle, Daniel approached them once more. "Caleb, Evelyn, I'm truly sorry for what you've been through today. I promise you these men will face the full extent of the law. And," he added, looking at Evelyn's injuries, "we'll make sure they cover any medical expenses for your injuries, ma'am, every penny of it." Evelyn nodded gratefully. "Thank you, Officer Barrington. You've been a godsend today." Daniel smiled warmly. "Please call me Daniel. Any friend of Caleb's is a friend of mine. Now, why don't you two sit down and relax? I'll make sure you're not disturbed further." As Daniel moved away to continue overseeing the situation, Caleb guided his mother back to their booth. The cafe, once a place of hostility and fear, was slowly transforming. The air of tension was dissipating, replaced by a sense of relief and perhaps the first stirrings of change. Evelyn looked around, taking in the scene. "You know, Caleb," she said softly, "I think this place might just become somewhere we can make new memories after all." Caleb squeezed his mother's hand, a mix of emotions playing across his face. The afternoon had been far from what they'd planned, but in facing adversity together, their bond had only grown stronger. As they sat in the booth, surrounded by the bustle of justice being served, mother and son found a moment of peace, grateful for each other's presence and the unexpected turn of events that had brought truth to light. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the street as Caleb and Evelyn finally emerged from Beacon Cafe. The events of the day had left them both physically and emotionally drained, but there was a sense of resolution in the air. The cafe behind them was a hive of activity as police officers continued to take statements and process the arrested bikers. Caleb kept a protective arm around his mother's shoulders as they slowly made their way down the sidewalk. Evelyn leaned into her son's strength, grateful for his presence. As they walked in companionable silence, both were lost in thought, processing the tumultuous events of the afternoon. After a few moments, Caleb broke the silence. "Mom," he began, his voice soft but determined, "I want you to know that I'm going to take care of your cataract treatment. No arguments." Evelyn looked up at her son, a mixture of gratitude and hesitation in her eyes. "Caleb, that's very generous of you, but—" "No buts, Mom," Caleb interrupted gently. "You've taken care of me my whole life. It's time I returned the favor. And I'm not just talking about the medical expenses. I'm going to make sure you have all the support you need." Evelyn's eyes misted over at her son's words. She patted his hand affectionately. "You're a good boy, Caleb, just like your father." They walked a few more steps before Evelyn spoke again, her voice tinged with a hint of vulnerability that Caleb rarely heard. "You know, there is one thing I've been wanting to ask." Caleb looked down at his mother, concern etched on his face. "What is it, Mom?" Evelyn took a deep breath before continuing. "I was wondering, hoping really, if there might be a way to get all my children together before any treatment or surgery. I know it's asking a lot, with everyone's busy lives, but—" Her voice trailed off, but Caleb understood the unspoken words. The possibility of complications, the risks that came with surgery at her age. It all hung in the air between them. Caleb stopped walking and turned to face his mother fully. "Mom, listen to me. I promise you we're going to make that happen. I'll talk to Mark and David. We'll figure out a way to get everyone together, whether the doctors approve the surgery or not." Evelyn's eyes welled with tears at her son's words. "Oh, Caleb, that would mean the world to me." Caleb pulled his mother into a gentle hug, mindful of her injuries. As they embraced, he felt a new understanding of the challenges she'd faced living alone, dealing with her deteriorating eyesight while he served in the Navy and his siblings moved to different states. The day's events had given him a new perspective on his mother's strength and resilience. As they resumed their walk, Evelyn's step seemed a bit lighter. "You know," she mused, "despite everything that happened today, I'm glad we went to the cafe." Caleb raised an eyebrow in surprise. "Really, after all that?" Evelyn nodded. "It reminded me of how strong we are together, and it showed me that there's still good in the world, people willing to stand up for what's right." Caleb smiled, feeling a surge of pride for his mother's indomitable spirit. "You're pretty amazing, you know that, Mom?" Evelyn chuckled softly. "Oh, I don't know about that. I'm just an old lady who's seen a thing or two in her time." As they neared Evelyn's home, Caleb made a decision. "Mom, I'm going to stay with you for the next 3 days before I have to report back to duty. We'll use that time to start planning the family reunion and to get you set up for your medical consultations." Evelyn's face lit up at the prospect of extended time with her son. "That would be wonderful, dear. We can catch up properly without any interruptions from unruly bikers." They both laughed, the sound a cathartic release after the tension of the day. As they approached Evelyn's front door, the setting sun painted the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. It was a beautiful end to a day that had started so chaotically. Caleb helped his mother up the front steps, a renewed sense of purpose filling him. He knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, convincing his brothers to come together, navigating the complexities of Evelyn's medical care, and dealing with the aftermath of the day's events. But he was determined to face these challenges head-on, just as his mother had faced adversity throughout her life.